Hi, I'm Nikki, the Obsessive Bookseller. Welcome to my channel, and welcome to Project YA. I am making a concerted effort to read more books from my physical collection. I realized that a third of my library is dedicated to YA books, and yet I read practically none of them these days. And there are still quite a few on there that I'm interested in getting to eventually, but I've got to read them in, bits and pieces. I need breaks between them. Because while I like the genre, I think I am outgrowing it a little bit. I am getting tired of reading them. But they do serve as pretty good palate cleansers between other denser reads. Like, I can only read so many adult grimdark books before I need something lighthearted. So these are fitting the bill. So what I've done is I've gone through my collection and pulled out all of the high priority series that I want to read and consolidated them on a shelf and assigned a number to each one. And for this project, I pick a number out of a jar and read the corresponding book. So at the end of the last video, I chose number 4, which ended up being Etiquette and Espionage by Gail Carriger. It's the Finishing School series, kind of a prequel story, young adult version to her adult Parasol Protectorate series, which is an adult urban fantasy. And from my collection, I have the entire thing, and my goal is to see how far I will get before the end of my allocated week of reading. This is different than how I initially planned to run this challenge. I was planning on reading just one book at a time and then redrawing. And what I would do is then take the second book and plunk that in the shelf with the same number and wait until it comes up again in rotation. But I don't know, these books are so short. And part of me says I don't want any more open series just for the sake of all of these projects and challenges that I'm running. So if I can figure out a way to do like a one and done, I will. So yep, we're gonna see what I can do this week. Let's talk about this book for a minute. First of all, it's been like 2 months since I filmed my introduction for this video, between that point and when I finally have had a chance to pick up this novel. Can you call a YA book a novel? Anyway, I have rearranged my schedule and I find myself with an entire week to devote to Project YA. And I thought, instead of bouncing around to different series, which I've been doing with practically everything I've been reading lately, I decided I'm going to take that whole week and try to read as many of these books as I can, provided that I'm enjoying them. So I'm consuming them primarily on audio. I have the first 4 books lined up, ready to go, and they're about like 8 hours a piece, which if you speed up the reading speed, probably closer to 5 hours a piece. I should be able to read at least 3, 2 on a bad week. But I thought it would be kind of cool to give you kind of like an insight into how the whole series is going for me as opposed to just the first book. So when I initially picked this one up back in March, because this is my second attempt at it, I was trying to listen to it before bed and just had too many things going on, decided to put it down for later, wasn't really invested. This time around, picked it up a bit early before I had a chance to focus on it, tried to read it before bed, and made it 2 minutes into the audiobook before falling asleep each time. Something about either the narration or the pacing of the very first of the book bored me to tears, or must have, because I couldn't retain anything. So I'm like, okay, evidently I cannot listen to this one before bed. I have to actually pick it up during the day when I can concentrate more attention on it, because obviously I'm not at the point where I can just go with the flow. So picked it up, much better. Although there is an element of, I feel like I'm missing something. I feel like there's a bunch of components to this world that are just kind of brushed over, and I'm still trying to figure out what the heck is going on. I am about 25% of the way through, and so far there's what feels like a secret society. We've got a character who is just really going with the flow way more than I would ever. And it's about things that would probably disturb a lot of people, but she's just like, meh, things are fine. There's a giant airship that they're on. I mean, it's a little weird. So I imagine that if you've read the adult series, that all of those things were explained there, and she's assuming you're picking this one up after having read that one. Because the way things are being described is as if you already should know what's going on in this world. So I feel just slightly lost. I feel like characters are being introduced very casually, and they feel like they have a lot of weight behind them, but I don't know what that weight is, so there's no significance. Like, oh, I can tell they're important, but I don't know why. That being said, though, there's a couple of supernatural components to this, like there's mention of a werewolf, and before going into this, I had no idea what type of story it was going to be, so, you know, interesting hodgepodge of things. We've got, like, a Victorian era, we've got supernatural, we've got steampunk elements, murder mystery, school setting. They call it finishing school, and I'm getting the impression that they're being cheeky with that, like, as in, like, finishing a job, finishing someone off. So the murder aspect as opposed to like polishing your etiquette type of things. So far so good though. I will update you with more thoughts later. Hi, Nikki here with a Project YA update. Filming in a weird location because I'm rearranging shelves and I already had all my equipment set up to film the process for my patrons, so bear with me. But I finished Etiquette and Espionage yesterday, and the overall consensus is that I think this would be a lot better if you had read the urban fantasy series first, because everything's a little thin. It's like she doesn't take the time to really establish the location of this finishing school, nor does she take the time to kind of ground the characters. And also, I kind of had a trouble with the plot. I couldn't understand why the main character was doing what she was doing in this world. It seems like it really wasn't her problem or any of her business, but she made it her business, and that didn't make a lot of sense to me. I do know that this grows into something more, and I'm hoping, because most of my problems were with execution and development, that as we get further in the series, she'll kind of find her stride. And I also am quite excited to read the adult urban fantasy, The Parasol Protectorate, so I am committed to continuing these to eventually pick those up, and you know, I always prefer to read things in chronological order anyway, so this is par for the course for me. I like the ideas in it enough, and I enjoyed myself with it enough that I'm coming in at a 3 out of 5 stars. I liked it. It was nothing to write home about. The finishing school aspect could have been explored a lot further. I feel like that wasn't the point of the book, and it really could have been. So now I'm continuing the series. The next one is Curtsies and Conspiracies. I finished the first book in a couple of days. I'm probably going to take another couple of days to do this one. So by the time I wrap up this vlog, I'll probably have finished 3 of the 4. And actually, I noticed while on Goodreads yesterday that this series has 4 books, and then there either was a continuation or a spin-off that they are considering books 5 through 7, even though it has a different name. So there is a bonus trilogy to this. I don't know if I'm going to read those. It'll depend on how I feel when I finish everything. I don't own copies of those, and it doesn't look like they're available at my library on audio, so that might be the determining factor. I might jump straight into Parasol Protectorate at a distant date instead of doing those 3, but we shall see. But anyway, this is the next one. Book 2 is going quite well. I'm about 20% into it, and already the plot has relaxed a little bit. It makes more sense, some of the things the characters are doing. The characters have more of a connection to one another. They're actually spending some good quality time in classrooms and appreciating the school setting a little bit more. Basically, all of the things that I had a hard time with in the first book have been slowly improved on in this one. It's not fantastic yet, but it is better. So I'm enjoying it a little more. I do love that I'm taking the time to just kind of go through this whole series. I am going to make a concerted effort to finish the series by the end of the week, at least the first 4. I did some research, and the 3 books that are in addition to this, like this is about a 10-hour audiobook read. Those ones are about a 5-hour audiobook read. And I don't know that I necessarily want to spend an Audible credit on them to read them, but I might pick up an e-copy and finish it out that way, because if I'm going to be a completionist, I may as well do the entire thing. But we'll see how the timeline lines up. It's Thursday right now. I was hoping to start something new on Monday. It's always a little easier to listen to books on the weekends, and I have been prioritizing reading over other things lately, which has been kind of cool for me. This is random, but it's me, so you should be used to that by now. So I discovered that I have a really hard time sitting still and reading. Like, my brain has been trained by my phone and by all social media to be constantly needing that stimulus, or else I get really antsy. I have found the solution to that, especially when I'm at home, is to turn on Spotify on the TV and just let music go in the background. And I've discovered that it's not distracting from the text at all. In fact, what it does is it gives just enough extra stimulation that I'm able to then focus on the text. And I can kind of bounce around to the music, which gives my body an outlet so that I can let my mind continue concentrating on the book. So I think my reading has like doubled this last week since I discovered that. It was very odd, but it was stemmed from my desire to stop watching so much TV and to get off of my phone, because I spend way too much time on YouTube. Anyway, for now, really liking this one. I finished the second book. Took me a couple days, maybe a bit longer than I was hoping it would, but I gotta say I like this one a lot better than the first. It seems like the characters were a lot more grounded. I appreciated the relationship between one another a bit more. It felt more realistic. I also thought the plot was more realistic in the sense that I could see why the main character was involving herself in the conflict, as opposed to the first one where I was like, why does she care about this? And also, it did a good job piggybacking off of the events that happened in the first book and kind of extending the plot a bit, kind of richening it, making it deeper, digging a little deeper. It was cool. The one thing I'm not sure about still at this point is the world building. It just seems so unnecessarily hodgepodged. So if you read a supernatural book that has werewolves and vampires, you kind of get a little bit of explanation on the lore and why there are vampires and werewolves in this world, but they almost seem like an afterthought here, and they don't make a lot of sense to me. And then you add airships on top of it and mechanical dogs and these like random steampunk elements, and it's just something about it is not meshing well together for me. There's not enough supernatural explanations or components for there to be werewolves and vampires, and yet they are kind of essential to the plot. So now granted, there might be more explanation in the bigger series, but I'm not reading the bigger series. I started with this one. I feel like it should be self-contained and everything kind of laid bare for me here. But no, it just seems like the author was like, you know, I really like all these components. Wouldn't that be cool if there was a whole bunch and you get like a monster and like a superhero and like this really cool dog, and then you get everything together. It's just gonna be awesome. I may cut that. It seems like a kid's version of what would make a cool story. Not to say it wasn't like well written or whatever. It's definitely one of the better young adult series that I've read in the sense of good dialogue, interesting characters, interesting world, even though it is a bit weird. Finished this one. The first one was like a 2.5 star. This one's probably a 3 star. So I have reached the end of my allocated week for recording this, and I was hoping to finish the entire 4-book series in that time frame, which realistically, had I not had so much going on, I probably could have done it, but I didn't want to also force myself to read when the timing just wasn't right. So at this moment, I have 2 left in the main series, 4 books. I don't have an entire week to dedicate to finishing those, but what I think I might do is start my next read unrelated and then kind of work these in between other reads until this video has to go live. So I'll probably be filming up to the last minute. But I would like to kind of have a well-rounded reading experience with it to report on. And I also don't want to leave any loose ends, because if I pick Project YA again, I'm not going to pick this series to start with, but I also don't want to just leave it hanging unfinished, because then it'll sit there forever. So yeah, that's what I think I'm going to do. I'm just going to work it in here and there, see if I can round out the series, and I won't start my next project until I have finished this one. It just may mean the video won't go live for an extra couple of weeks. It's very much in line with my completionism strategy right now. I'm really sick of starting things and then moving on just because I don't have time to finish them. It's usually not a lack of desire, it's a lack of time and space, and I get so far ahead of myself on planning that I get antsy to jump to the next thing. So right now I'm sitting on 3 different buddy reads that are coming after this book, and I'm like stressed that if I don't start them soon, then I'm gonna miss the buddy reads, and I hate it when I'm late to buddy reads. I feel so lame. That's it for now. I finished the 3rd book yesterday, and I'm not gonna lie, I sat down to film and said the words that came out of my face were, I'm done. Like, I'm tired of reading a YA series. I want to move on with my life. I've spent almost 2 weeks on this, and it's lacking a bit of substance for me. Now, this one was the best one yet. To its credit, the first 50% was like wildly engaging. I enjoyed where it was going. I liked the interactions between the characters. And then something flipped where the external plot kicked in, and I found myself not caring by the end of the book. I'm not on board with the external world building and the problems that these characters are trying to solve in this series. It feels so thin to me. I don't understand the purpose of why we, as a group of POVs, are involved in the conflict. They don't have like a personal connection to anything that's going on. It's almost like, oh, well, this is what we're being trained for, so these are the type of things that we engage in, and so let's just do it just because we're bored. So I put it down going, I just need more substance, and I am lacking. Like, it's not poorly written. There are several books that I've read that are much worse. This is like a solid middle-of-the-road 3-star read where you're not going to get a lot out of it, but you don't, like, really hate yourself for having spent time reading it. But that being said, I was like, I'm done! And then I went to bed and realized I needed an audiobook to listen to, and it was either continue with the 4th one or try to pick up something that requires a lot of deep concentration. So I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I can read the next one. Plus, the completionism in me was trying to figure out what to do with it, because I know if I set it down, I probably won't go back to it. Now, I mentioned there are books 5 through 8 also, and I did a little more research into them, and although it's technically part of this series, it looks like it takes place 10 to 15 years after the events in these 4 books. And I think it's kind of like bridging the gap between this series and the Parasol Protectorate. So, with that said, because it's a set like of 3 that's totally different, I am considering once I finish this one that I am done with this YA series. And really, 4 books is beyond my threshold. I probably should have stopped at 2, but I have time because I'm filming far enough ahead, so why not? I love the idea of the finishing school for espionage. I think that is so cool. I think she should be focusing more on that. I think the dynamics between the main character and the other students at the school is where the money is at, and she's not focusing on that particularly. Forgot to mention in that 3rd book, the love interests became a bigger theme. The social niceties and parties and stuff became a bigger theme, and I don't mind that. Love triangles for me don't bother me at all in books. Like, have never been bothered by that. I really like having options, and I love the psychology of trying to figure out who they're going to end up with, if they're written well. If it's clear from the beginning who her choice is going to be, I don't like that type of love story. I'm like, you're just messing around on the guy you want to be with. Like, pick one. But if there's like a really compelling reason for them to end up with either person, I like that. That being said, there's a love triangle in this series, and it's not being handled particularly well, but I'm not sure which one she's going to choose, so that right there is interesting. I know who I would choose for her. Just my final update will be me wrapping up the series and giving you my overall thoughts. I might even do in other books you might like, because this has been kind of an unofficial review as I've read the series, so stay tuned. Random update. So I was just listening to the 4th and final book in the Finishing School series right before bed, and I had an epiphany. So the overall plot of the series is something that just hasn't been working for me. I have not been enjoying it, and I finally figured out why. It's because there has not been enough plot to sustain each individual book. The plot that is overarching for the entire series should have been a plot for just one book, but she stretched it out over the entire series. So there's nothing satisfying at the end of each of these books. There's no resolution. Everything was so just gradually building that it really didn't feel like there was anything of substance to be had. So that is the problem. If you consume everything in like one sitting, kind of like I've done, then yeah, you'll get kind of like a growth and a completion or whatever. But for each individual book, I don't feel like there's enough there. And even the relationships between the characters and how those build, that is more of a series arc as opposed to an individual book arc. So yes, that is the problem. It's almost like she wrote one big book and then they split it up into 4 parts. That's more what it feels like, which makes sense because she's first an adult urban fantasy author, so I get it. Anyway, yeah, suddenly makes sense. I'm about halfway through the final book, and I will close out with my final thoughts on that in a couple days. I finished the 4th and final book, and overall it went pretty well. Everything kind of culminated in this one book, the sort of momentum we had been lacking throughout the whole season. and I found myself more engaged with a greater volume of this book than I have with the previous ones. Like, it kept my attention more, and there was a lot of really fun reveals. And actually, a couple of the reveals I thought, that never made sense to begin with, so the reveal actually makes a lot of sense, but it was kind of forced. That won't make any sense out of context, but it was just a little bit clunky. Overall, I like the essence of what this book was trying to be. I really liked the school setting sequences where they're in the classrooms learning espionage, and I love the dynamics and relationships between the main character and her friends. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. This is kind of a petty complaint, but the names in this story are so stupid. The main character's name is Sophronia. To me, that's a name that's more suited to like a posh little fluffy white dog than it is a person. And then the main love interest, they call him Soap, like hand soap. And I think it is so stupid. It's not his actual name, but it's what they refer to him as throughout the entire series, and she gives an explanation for it, but I forgot what it was. I don't know, the names, it keeps me from taking them completely seriously. I'm coming in at a 3.5 out of 5 stars for this final book, and a 3 out of 5 star for the overall series. I would not go out of my way to recommend this to someone, but it wasn't a bad read. If someone were like, oh, I'm really interested in that, I'd be like, cool, go for it. But now I will show you some other books you might like, mayhaps a bit better. Let's look into the other books you might like. So the first one I pulled is Heist Society by Ally Carter, and full disclosure, I've not actually read this one yet. I am predicting that I'm going to like it more than the Finishing School series overall. The author is a little more well-known in the YA genre and writes specifically for young adults, so I think we'll have kind of a more composed story here. Yeah, this one's very high up on my list, but the similarities between the descriptions of the two are but I do not believe this one has a paranormal or fantasy angle, which I might actually prefer. The Naturals by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. If your favorite aspect of the Finishing School series was the espionage angle, but you wish more time had been spent on the development of all of that, this is the novel for you. This is such a fun series. This is probably my all-time favorite YA book. Girl of Fire and Thorns gives it a run for its money, but I absolutely love this one. Again, no fantasy elements. Well, kind of a little bit. These kids have special abilities, but they're not abilities that are beyond the realm of it being possible for someone to have, if that makes sense. It's definitely highly unlikely, but things like being super good at statistics, being really good at reading people, being able to tell when people are lying by looking at their tells, that kind of stuff. Also by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, The Fixer. I really like this author. She's a psychology teacher at Yale, so she brings all of that cool background knowledge to her books, and they're just so intelligently done. This one is more of like if Scandal had a YA version, and so The Finishing School was a lot about the politics of everything going on, and I think this one was comparable for that reason. The Selection by Kiera Cass. If your favorite aspect was the Finishing School and all of the pretty dresses and parties, and you couldn't care less about the espionage side, here, pick this one. This one also has thin world building, so if that didn't bother you in the Finishing School series, then you should be just fine here. And what's more, it's got an element of competition. So between the two, I very much preferred this series. Loved the first 2 books. Didn't really care for the third one, but it doesn't matter. These ones were so good that I just don't care. I really loved them. Wither by Lauren DeStefano. This one is an edgier recommend. Girls in pretty dresses, kind of a weird hodgepodge of genres, cool, memorable atmosphere. This series is a trip, and I loved it from start to finish. All 3 books were incredibly strong for me, and it was so good that I kind of want to go back and reread it at some point. I think the only comparison I can make between the 2 series is the elegance of it and a memorable atmosphere, but in all ways this one was darker and better. So, highly recommend this one. There you have it. I think I'm going to end things here. That was an epic project, but very satisfying for me because I did everything from start to finish, and I'm not leaving any loose ends to tie up later. I'll probably take this format of trying to read the whole series for one vlog into future Project YA videos that I do. But I kind of got a gauge now, like I'm definitely not going to be able to do it all in 1 week, so I've got to kind of plan around that. Unless it's a really short trilogy. That has possibilities. Anyway, at the start of the next video, I will pick from my little jar and figure out what on my high priority shelf I'm going to be picking up next. I'm not going to do it at the end of this video like I normally do because I have discovered that if I draw too quickly, then I get antsy and want to get to that new series before I'm ready, and then it just causes stress. So I'm going to wait until I'm actually ready to pick up something YA, and then we'll do it then. Thanks so much for joining me on this one, and I hope to catch you next time. Bye.